Bronwyn, thank you very much for agreeing to do this morning. It's brilliant to see you again.
You're very welcome, Brendan, and a pleasure to see you, and Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you as well. We're going to start off, Bronwyn. You were voted one of the top 21 most inspiring women in cyber at the back end of last year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, I was delighted. Actually, it was a lovely way to finish 2021 on. And I think it's a great initiative, Brendan. It was set up primarily really to try and balance the gender diversity in cybersecurity. It still can be perceived as a bit more of a male sphere, and sometimes there's stereotypical images of kind of computer security types, shall we say, that don't always necessarily kind of appeal to a broader spectrum. So they set this initiative up as a way of just really kind of advocating for female success in the discipline of cyber. And I was over the moon to be nominated. I don't know who nominated me originally, but I got a very lovely email from the organisers saying I had been nominated, and then a few other folks pitched in, which was very kind of them. And there was a long list of about 50 very, very talented, phenomenally accomplished women that they whittled down to the top 21. And I was, really, really pleased to be in such illustrious company. There's some really, really amazing talent out there.
Brilliant stuff. No, I was delighted to see it, and congrats again on that. And I mean, we'll get into the career side in a second, but as you brought it up there, just in terms of the kind of gender diversity in this kind of area, have you seen that change, Bronwyn, over the years? I mean, is it going in the right direction? And when you started, was it very male dominated, or?
Yeah, very, very much so, Brendan. I mean, I was very accustomed to often being the only kind of female on a team. You know, I remember there was one big project I did where I was sitting on a bank of 20 of us all developing, and I was the only girl at the time. So it was very, very heavily male oriented. I'm delighted to see that changing now. I think there's great female leaders to inspire kind of the new and up and coming talent, which is fantastic to see. And I think it's just becoming more of an appealing option for women and for non-binary folks to kind of explore. I think we're busting down some of those stereotypes. We're I think doing a better job of reflecting the rounded skill set that you need. I think there can often be a perception that it's quite technical, and indeed elements of the role and elements of cybersecurity are always going to be technical, but it's very much as important to have those soft skills, those focused on people and behaviours and also processes. And I think that's becoming better understood now. So I'm delighted to see more girls and women kind of coming up the ranks. I'm delighted to have amazing female mentors and friends that I can network with, which is wonderful. And also great just seeing, some of the really good initiatives to get girls coding and to get them more into kind of STEAM subjects. And I think all of that will pay dividends over time as well.
Great stuff. And Bronwyn, you're the Chief Information Security Officer for Mambo. And maybe can you just tell people listening, what is the Chief Information Security Officer? Maybe break that down for us and tell us about the role.
I will, of course. Well, let me start first of all just to give a quick download on Mambu in case folks don't know who we are. We're a fintech, so it's an up and coming digital company that's focused on improving banking services and the banking experience for customers and also companies across the world. Very much focusing also on opening up banking services for underserved or underbanked communities and kind of democratizing financial services so that people have a better deal and a better experience, which is really great. And we're also working with some of the more established and traditional banking institutions to help them improve their technology and efficiency and effectiveness. Really exciting company to be part of and great values. The role of CISO, I have a very broad mandate. So I'm responsible for security pretty much end to end across the organisation. That's everything from physical security and the security of our colleagues in our offices to the security of our platform, and we run across a number of cloud platforms, which folks will be, maybe if you're involved in technology or you're interested in technology, you'll have heard things of AWS, Amazon Web Services, Azure Web Services, Google, all of those big cloud platforms we run, and we have to keep those secure. We also have an ecosystem of new kind of fintech products that plug into our platform. So we have a view of kind of composable banking that allows customers to plug and play with what they want to kind of develop in terms of services. that ecosystem itself also has to keep secure, and also all of our vendors and partners that we work with, they will present cyber risks, so they have to be managed and supported. And most importantly, it's about the behaviours and attitude and awareness and skills of our Mambuvians, our whole employee population, who are very traditionally very passionate about security and can be our best advocates and best line of defence to help keep the organisation secure. So quite a broad brush stroke. It's a very interesting role because of that breadth. It cuts across the whole organisation, so every day is a new challenge.
Brilliant. And can you describe, maybe give us your typical day? Although I'm guessing there isn't a typical day, but maybe just give us a view of it.
You're so right, Brendan. I mean, it's one of the things I love about it is that every day is different in and of itself. I'm only 3 months into the role, I should add, so it's still a new journey for me, and it's very interesting because December, anybody who's working in technology will have an interesting December with Log4j, which I think interrupted one of our first attempts to get together for this. And again, for your audience who may not have heard of Log4j, it was a very well publicised global internet issue that was causing a lot of concern across security communities. And those types of vulnerability can pop up at any time, right? Maybe not of the magnitude of Log4j, but I mean, we're constantly battling with security incidents or vulnerabilities that might come in any day and completely derail your plans for the day or the week. So there's an element of kind of that incident response that adds a bit of variety anyway to your experiences. But also my day can look at a wide variety of topics. I could be spending time on kind of corporate strategy or commercial strategy. Where are we going as a business? What customers are we looking to engage with? And then how are we helping them understand our security posture and get them comfortable with our controls? I could be spending time on kind of developing the team and spending time kind of working through our strategy. I could be spending time, as I said, on the vulnerability management side, incident management. It's such a broad brushstroke. No day looks the same, and that can be a little overwhelming at times, but it also keeps it very exciting, and it means it's one of those roles you're never going to get bored in.
And you mentioned a little bit ago there, Bronwyn, about the skill sets, right, yes, of maybe young men and women that might be thinking of getting into this area. If you were hiring for your team, let's say tomorrow, and I know there'd be varying roles, but what kind of skills in particular would you be looking for? I guess on both the technical side and the soft side. And is there any sort of degrees or masters that you would keep an eye out for that people might have that would be of benefit in a role?
It's a great question, Brendan, and a few different elements to unpick. If I can start with the degree piece first of all, I mean, I think traditionally folks in our field have often come from a computer science background or more technical background, even mathematics or engineering, because I think a lot of the skill sets and the discipline of kind of thought processes and problem solving coming from those types of degrees, and obviously the hands-on skill sets in a computer science or cybersecurity degree will always be relevant. That said, I think we touched on diversity, and I think first of all, there's a huge swathe of opportunity in cybersecurity. We're facing a very well kind of recognised war on talent and a cyber skills shortage globally. There's some staggering stats on this, Brendan. I mean, some reports are saying there's up to 4 million roles needed globally that we don't have people qualified to do. So what I would say is it's a very, very great opportunity for folks who have a little yen for this type of career. We're very welcoming, and we need talent, and we need interested people. So hopefully there's plenty of space for folks there. And that space in itself, I'm also very keen that we're driving a more inclusive approach to the types of folks that we're opening it up to. So previously it would have been very focused on what your degrees and qualifications are. But I think in terms of what I'm looking for is maybe kind of a lower barrier to entry, right? So I think a lot of the skill sets that we need can be learnt on the job, with the right training and with the right kind of apprenticeship approaches or kind of support and mentoring approaches. And I would hate to see us excluding the talent that maybe come from backgrounds who haven't had the opportunity to go to university. There are lots of certifications that can be done. Again, some of those can be quite expensive, and again, they may hinder opportunities for folks who are at more of a socioeconomic disadvantage. But what I will say is I think the industry is doing an awful lot more to try and rebalance that and get people with a talent, with natural curiosity, with a passion for technology or human behaviour or organisational transformation, who want to come in, who want to learn, who embrace the way that our technology is changing our lives. And I think, you and I know, I mean, we've been around for a few years now, and I think the difference in what's on the internet, what's available, what's on your phone now in terms of, the systems that we use to make our lives easier and for accessing services that were previously kind of much more traditionally offered. It's changing all the time, right? So I think having that curiosity, drive for knowledge, drive to keep learning, a passion for tech is great as well. But all of those are really key attributes that would help kind of get folks engaged in any type of cybersecurity career, as well, of course, as the people who are interested in the more hands-on technical side of things. And you and I, again, came from a background where we would have done things like pen testing and forensics and those much more hands-on technical disciplines. But it's not that's not the only dimension of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into, and maybe again for people listening, Bronwyn, that wouldn't be that familiar even with the term cybersecurity, because it means so much, doesn't it? Can you give maybe a quick overview of what is cybersecurity? And what I'd like to touch on then afterwards is where are we going with it, but maybe we'll get to that part in a minute.
Absolutely, and you're spot on. I mean, it's one of those buzzwords that means so many things to many people, and in fact I think a lot of people hear it and get a bit bamboozled and may switch off. It's something we need to do, I think, as a tech industry more broadly, is actually making some of our terminology more accessible. I suppose for me, cybersecurity basically means making sure that the people, process and technologies that support digital systems are secure and resilient, so that if they are attacked, they can quickly detect, recover and respond to those attacks. We're living in an increasingly interconnected world. I mean, our phones are like an extra limb at these stages. We use online services for so many aspects of our daily lives. And also, if you look at our critical national infrastructure that we depend on, from utilities to healthcare to banking, increasingly, again, they are driven online, and they're driven through interconnected, internet-enabled services. For me, cybersecurity is about keeping all of those secure. We have so many different vectors where we may need to kind of provide preventative controls and detective controls, and they can range from, sophisticated threat actors who are actively trying to do harm, and they can be nation-state attackers. So we've seen, even last year with the Colonial Pipeline attack in the US on the water supply, that's an example of where adversarial threat actors can really cause damage and impact into society and into our 3D infrastructure. We've obviously also got kind of cyber criminals who are very active in this space. And interestingly, Brendan, since the COVID pandemic, I mean, certainly here in the UK, we've seen an explosion in online fraud. People have had to move to digital payment services because they can't go up to the road to their bank, or their branches are closing and they're having to stay working from home. So their laptops and their mobiles have been their lifeline into the outside world. And that has been increasingly attractive to cyber criminals. I mean, they're saying here in the UK, we're losing up to £4 million every single day to fraudsters, which is a phenomenal amount of money. And of course, behind all those zeros, there's somebody at home who's lost their family savings, or they've lost their money for the month or whatever. There's a very real social impact behind that. So for me, cybersecurity is about looking at all of those elements, from the technical to the social to the user awareness, to make sure that we're acting responsibly and kind of maturely and with alacrity to keep us all safe.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And you've called out a couple of examples there of, I guess, the Log4j incident that happened a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of that happening, and it seems to be increasing, around the globe and across all different industries as well. What is your view of where is technology going, let's say, over the next decade? Where is that going, and how is that going to impact people like yourself and your role, and people that are starting in their careers now? Do you see, because it's changing so quickly, isn't it?
Well, it is changing so quickly, Brendan. And again, I mean, even if you look at kind of our technology landscape today and you kind of think back 10 years ago, probably maybe before the advent of social media, or just the very kind of beginnings of social media and kind of the explosion that made and the difference it made to our lives. And you look now at the increasing use of machine learning and AI to drive automated decisioning and automated systems. You know, it is a very rapidly and exponentially evolving landscape. And that, you know, it makes it quite difficult to predict stuff to a certain extent, but I think we are going to absolutely see more automation, which will have a broad impact, I think, on all sorts of jobs. A few examples would be maybe even in the fields of medicine or law, where you would have had previously very specialized individuals having to spend a long time to kind of learn niche skills that can now either be done via robotics or via machine learning, where they can smash through massive data sets very quickly, looking for patterns and opportunities to aggregate and correlate data. All of these technology revolutions are really, really changing the landscape of work and also career opportunities. For me, I suppose the consistent piece is they all have security risk and they all introduce security risk. And I'm also very interested in kind of how they also change kind of the social dynamic and the social contract, particularly if you look at things like AI. I mean, we touched on the diversity challenge. You know, if you've got AI that's being coded with a particular cognitive bias from a particular segment, social segment, it's not going to represent the community that it's servicing. So I think it's another reason why it's so important to build in diversity of thought and kind of, you know, really proactively foster that as we start our kind of embracing these technologies and they start permeating our lives.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I was listening to, I don't know if you listen to Elon Musk. I enjoy listening to him when he does his interviews, but he'd have us maybe start to consider that we'll be fighting the AI at some point in time in the future, and they'll be our external factor. But it's an interesting concept.
It's not beyond the thought, because I think one thing we don't realize exactly is the power of AI. It can learn independently, and there may be unintended consequences of that learning. And I think there's a lot of great literature out there at the moment around how we need to kind of maybe nearly treat AI algorithms like our children and show them love and nurture them and kind of take a more responsible approach, so that they're learning in a positive way about humanity rather than just about how to generate clicks and likes and revenue.
Absolutely, it's something. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond my technical ability to understand how AI could get to that point. I mean, when I hear that, I wouldn't naturally be skeptical. How could AI become so advanced that it could turn on humanity? But then you listen to all the people like yourself, the people that understand AI and how it's built, and they're saying, well, it could happen. So you have to sit up and take notice.
I'll give you a good example of that, Brendan. I mean, if you gave an AI algorithm, the goal of eradicating cancer, it could just decide to stop treating cancer patients. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you can find these... Do you know what I mean? When you think about how a machine interprets an instruction or a goal, and then you kind of say, well, hang on a minute, there's lots of ways of going, or, just kill all humans and then there's no more cancer, right? You know what I mean? I know that's a bit preposterous and kind of, Terminator 2-esque, but I mean, at the same time, I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves when we are setting goals that we're then putting in the hands of machines to make decisions on. Have we set them up in the right way? Have we kind of considered all of those side effects about how a machine might go about achieving a goal? And are we monitoring it? Can we understand decisioning? Do we have that visibility and transparency into how its algorithms working and evolving? These are all fascinating topics that I think we're collectively trying to get a handle on as an industry.
Yeah, it is. And can we go back, Bronwyn, as well, to where did your interest in cybersecurity, but I suppose technology in general, start? Was that always with you, or was it something you developed as your career progressed?
It's very funny that you asked that question. Yeah, it's really funny that you asked that question, Brendan, because I was in no way a technologist in my younger years. I was a very late adopter. When I started in computing, actually, one of the icebreaker questions that people used to ask would be, tell us about your first computer. And you'd have folks light up and talk about their Ataris or some early, very kind of like clunky Apple that they got back in the day. And I was like, I didn't even have a speak and spell. I mean, I wanted a speak and spell. I didn't have one of those, you know. I was writing my university, you know, dissertations on typewriters. I was that late kind of getting into technology. So I would say, no, it wasn't something I kind of felt particularly strongly about. And even when I started, I ended up doing a postgrad in computer science, nearly more because I kind of didn't really know what else to do. I've been one of those people, Brendan, who always struggled knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I'm probably arguably
like
still
myself.
one of those people, exactly. Which is why I think you're doing such an amazing job with this podcast to kind of, you know, offer some insights to folks who may be grappling with the same challenges. And I think with that knowledge, good stuff. So my initial degree was actually in Greek and Roman civilization and classical studies, which is about as opposite as kind of futurist technology as you could get. But I think what it did give me was an exposure to kind of philosophy and logic and kind of like breaking down, kind of, you know, analysing, shall we say, situations and kind of breaking down particular topics to kind of get a deeper understanding. And finishing my master's, I didn't know what to do, and I saw that at the time UCD had a new HDip in computer science, and really, for want of anything better to do, I thought, sure, look, I'll give that a go, and that was the start of the journey. And I think, you know, as I've continued through my career, I mean, it's interesting. You know, we talk particularly on the diversity side about imposter syndrome and about how particularly, I mean, I think that's relevant not just for women. I think a lot of men feel that as well. I think it's one of those prevailing psychological traits that can permeate our working lives these days. And actually, I always felt, because I wasn't a technologist from a young age, and, you know, I'm not somebody who would have a very exciting weekend setting up a virtual network in my house, or, you know what I mean? You know, I never had that kind of really hands-on techie love. And I always felt a little bit maybe like that precluded me from really succeeding in the industry. And it was only, I think, as I kind of worked my way through and also worked in a variety of different roles where I saw, well, actually, my tech skills, and I mean, I did end up kind of coding and doing kind of some really hands-on development stuff. And indeed, just as I said, when we worked together, we were doing kind of very, very kind of techie work as well. But I think,
well, you were doing techie work. I don't think anyone can accuse me of doing anything too technical that time. But
you were keeping all the tech folks honest, Brendan, which is our harder job, arguably. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of as I grew in confidence with those technical skills, but also as I always started appreciating the bigger picture context and the fact that every machine and every technology decision that you take runs in a 3D real world context with real life people. That's probably where I started kind of finding my passion and also finding probably more of my confidence and my voice.
Brilliant. And when you did the masters, so you did the switch from philosophy into technology, how did you find that switch? And did you obviously had a natural aptitude for it, but I mean, was it difficult to do those kind of courses, coding? How did you feel about it?
I was very lucky, Brendan, in that first of all, I really love learning, and I've been really, really fortunate to have had great teachers and the opportunity to really kind of apply myself into and immerse myself into learning. So from that perspective, it wasn't that difficult. And I think because in my first year of my arts degree, I actually did maths, so I had a kind of a fairly mathematical leaning, as well as being kind of much more interested in the artsy side as well. I was a musician as well, and I think there's some natural synergies often between music and maths, and kind of just patterns and how we see those and how we interpret them in our kind of cognitive operations. So yeah, I mean, I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, there's an immense delight in being taught a coding language and then actually coding something that does something. It's really, really like it's like this eureka moment of, oh my goodness, I just typed some things and it made something happen. And I loved that. I found it absolutely joyful. And I love the fact now that they're bringing that into schools and they're giving kids an opportunity to kind of play around with coding. Because again, I think, maybe up till kind of fairly recently, the only not the only type, but the predominant type of folk who got into that were the people with the very strong technical aptitude and technical leaning who would push themselves and seek it out actively. And as I said, I think there's a whole load of people who could enjoy it and find it really super interesting, but wouldn't naturally maybe think of it. So I'm delighted that, we are as an industry promoting it at a younger age, and also trying to make it more accessible for folks who don't see themselves as that technical.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I have two young daughters, and they have, we kind of live in kind of rural enough area, in a rural national school, so it's quite small, and they have one computer in the school for everybody. And they had a class, I think it was maybe just before Christmas, and they had a kind of introduction to coding, and they came home and they absolutely waxed lyrical about it. Exactly what you said there, the fact that they were shown how to type in something, and I don't know, maybe it was cubes, but they got them to go in a certain direction. I don't really remember, but they just saw the end product of it. And just something clicked, as you say. To be shown something when you're young can make such a massive impression, and show them that they can do it. Yeah,
exactly, Brenda. And you touched on something there that's another topic that's very close to my heart, which is how do you try and open up the accessibility to this in schools, and make sure that kids have the access to equipment. Actually you can do so much even on an iPad, right? I mean, a lot of the code development courses now are designed to work on a very low footprint of machine, but really you're going to need to equip kids to be able to kind of interact with them. And if that doesn't happen, the inequality that we're seeing right now from a learning perspective is going to kind of dramatically increase, because you'll have a load of kids coming through who are digital natives, who are nearly coming out of school with coding chops, who can kind of walk in, even if they want to walk into a job rather than further education, that's an option for them. Whereas kids who haven't had that are at a much more of a disadvantage. So I think that's something we really need to consider.
That's a very valid point, actually. Yeah. Otherwise, you just see a big kind of mismatch. And so, how did you? So, once you did your qualification, Bronwyn, what was your first role? What door did it open for you?
So my very first role after the HDIP was actually as a management consultant with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And again, I didn't even really know what a management consultant did, to be honest with you. They had the milk round where they came to the universities, and they came to Deloitte and Arthur Andersen at the time, and a few other companies. And to be honest with you, this is going to sound terrible, but PwC had the best canapes, and I went, oh, I like these guys better.
It's a good reason as any.
Listen, do you know what I mean? They all kind of seemed similar to me, so I needed some sort of criteria. And the other thing they had, which was, I mean, looking back on it, it was incredible. But they said, look, all of our new recruits, we put through a training program. It's a 3-month training program, and it's in America. And I went, that sounds great, sign me up. So they shipped us all off to Tampa, Florida, and I had there, Brendan, what I think was one of the most amazing learning experiences of my life. I still use what they trained me there on in my day-to-day life. It was absolutely amazing. They taught us the entire kind of life cycle of software development, from gathering requirements and kind of working out what the business needs, turning that into something you can articulate as a spec and a requirement set, working out what languages to kind of code that in, and then kind of modularizing kind of the components, coding it, compiling it, releasing it, end to end, testing it, user testing, and then production. And it was absolutely incredible. I mean, learning experience of a lifetime. I often think back, my poor mum at home has all of my old notes from that course in a cupboard somewhere. I keep threatening to get rid of it, but I'm like, there's so much knowledge in those course notes. I'm kind of like, I need to go back to PwC and see, would they write a book on it or something to kind of help bring it out there. Put that in my ideas book. But yeah, I mean, it was an amazing experience. And as I said, I mean, Brendan, they used to call me the experiment in PwC, right? Because most of their graduate base were from much more technical degrees, science, engineering, computer science. And I only had this 1-year conversion course, which had been a brilliant, kind of first immersion, but I was coming with a much, much lower knowledge base. And actually, very quickly, I first of all discovered this absolute love for coding, and particularly for Java, which, some listeners will kind of wince at, given that was the kind of the log4j kind of, people don't necessarily feel as positive about Java as they did back then. But anyway, but I loved that coding and aspect of it, and I loved the aspect that you could sit down with a business, and it was very much like this, and I think you saw this in consultancy as well. You'd be parachuted into an organization. You didn't really know very much about how they operated or the people or what their drivers or goals were, and you'd have to very quickly build a relationship, figure out what's the problem, figure out then how to fix it with them and for them in collaboration. And it was an amazing, again, opportunity for me to kind of get such a breadth of experience in different types of organizations, working with different types of people and outcomes. And I think, I often look back on that and I think, consultancy as a starting point, particularly if you don't really know what you want to do, if you can get into consultancy and you get a chance to kind of test the waters in so many different avenues, it gives you first of all, gives you a great base about being adaptable and being flexible and kind of, very quickly adjusting to change. And I think that's essential now, because there's no such thing as a job for life and things change so quickly around us. But I also feel, it gives you that opportunity, just as I said, to kind of test the water, stick your toe in and kind of get a feeling for different cultures and different industries in a way that, you wouldn't necessarily if you kind of pick a more traditional career set. Yeah.
And I had similar, I would echo that, I suppose, from my experience with EY. It's a great grounding, and it's quite a broad, you get a broad spectrum of experience, especially when you're at the point where you still don't quite know exactly where you fit in or where you want to go. I think the consultancy firms are great in that way. And so PwC, did you join EY after that, Bronwyn, or what was your next step?
Well, actually, I one of probably the most exciting projects I worked at back in PwC was actually a digital bank, and it was around the kind of .com time. It was for one of the big Irish banks. And they decided, it was very forward thinking at the time, they said, we're going to kind of spin off a digital bank, to kind of work kind of not nearly in competition with our bricks and mortar offering, but it'll be purely digital. Now that's happening all the time now, but this was back in kind of like 2000, 2001. So it was really, really groundbreaking at that time. And it was one of the hardest projects I'd ever worked on. I mean, it was intense. It was really, really kind of brutal, but we loved it. Like, we were working weekends. We were out on a campus out in the suburbs of Dublin. And I mean, I've never been so happy to get up at 7 a.m. to go and spend the day kind of working. But we were really, it was brilliant. Really kind of really intense. And actually, my time on that, we didn't actually spend a lot of time on security. And I was always interested in learning, and I was kind of, security was nearly Dave's problem over there. Dave does security, he's over there. And I was like, but we're coding this stuff, and we're, it's a lot of work for Dave. Should I not know more about security? So I was in the fortunate position to be able to take a bit of time out, and I took a year to do an MSc then in DCU, specialising in cybersecurity and forensics. And it was the first year that they ran that degree, so it was very new in Ireland at the time. And again, it was a bit speculative on my part. I kind of wasn't sure if I wanted to be in security, but I knew I wanted to know more about it. And so I took the time to do that degree course. I found that now, Brendan, very difficult. It was very funny because I was going in as a mature student, and folks who might have been in a university will always remember there's often one really annoying mature student that's always asking questions, and that was me. I was like, I had no shame. I was like, I don't understand this. Can you please explain it in a way that I can understand?
Good for you.
Well, there you go. And also, I think, it really did kind of make me realise, I was asking questions that I think sometimes other people wanted to ask, but they were kind of either keeping the heads down or they were kind of trying to get out of the lecture hall sooner than I was. Yeah. But
but you know what? That's it's a great point to just pause on, I think, because a lot of people, especially when you're younger, I was anyway for sure, even in meetings or university, I was one of the quieter ones. I was afraid to ask the question just in case I looked silly, and then always 1 minute, 2 minutes later, somebody else asked the question that I was thinking in my head. And I think the sooner, if I could go back, I'd definitely be more vocal than I was, because, if you're thinking it, the chances are, I would say 99% somebody else has thought of it as well.
Do you know,
So just
Brendan,
ask the question.
I love that you said that. And again, I'm a very chatty person, but in those group situations, I can also kind of default a little bit to that kind of, oh God, if I don't understand it, I probably look like an idiot. And I think that MSc was probably the first time where like I was kind of forced into it, really, because I was like, look, I've invested a lot of time here and money into doing this course, and actually, I actually can't understand it. So it forced me to face my demons. But as I said, Brendan, the only silly question is the one that you don't ask, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. Yeah. But that was very technically challenging, that course.
It was, Brendan, it was. And again, I think, there were areas there that I kind of really enjoyed. So as I said, the coding and software development, loved that, got really into the cryptography side of things. Did my thesis on, it was around the time of the electronic voting machines in Ireland, which folks of a certain age will remember was a big old kind of hoo-ha for a while, because we invested all of these millions and millions of pounds into these voting machines, and then they never really worked, and then we were spending a fortune on storage. And I was looking at the ethics again of using, so even back then I was interested in kind of ethical application of technology, and I was looking at the ethics of kind of using these, and particularly if you weren't guaranteed of the robustness and the integrity of the output. So I wrote a cryptographic algorithm to do the validation and all this, and then so that was the coding project. And then as the kind of the essay piece, I kind of assessed the value of that, and then I said, use a pen and paper was my conclusion. So I'm still a little bit of a Luddite, Brendan, in all things tech. I don't necessarily think tech is the answer to all that ails us. But again, it was a great learning opportunity, and again, we did have that opportunity to look at things like ethics and kind of explore a more rounded view of technology, and that's what gave me then the I suppose the bottle really to try and apply for EY. Again, many of you will know Ernst & Young is obviously a kind of a very broad brushstroke consultancy, and they actually came in to do a course with us on forensics. So they had one of their very talented forensics leads come in and talk to us about the EY practice, and I went, that sounds fantastic. So I kind of plucked my courage up and I sent him an email and I sent him my CV, and then I didn't hear anything, and I said, oh, and then I better mail their HR department as well, because I saw that they had some vacancies opening. So I sent this HR department my CV and whatever, and I got a rejection letter, and my little heart was broken, Brendan. I was like, oh no, it was like I was really pinning my hopes on these guys. I thought they were great. And then literally the next day I got a phone call saying your interview is scheduled for next week, and I was like, what? So it turned out, as is often the way, these big organisations have different channels, and actually my personal reach out was the one that got me in, and that was another interesting lesson for me as well, Brendan, because I realised the power of networking and being proactive. Like if again, and that's something I've applied throughout my career now, just thanks to that episode, and seeing kind of official channels may not always be the ones that get you the conversation. So contact people. If you see people that you admire, if you're reading things that you're interested in, contact people. The worst thing that, first of all, it's lovely to hear from people that appreciate your work. So, I mean, the worst thing that you'll get is give them a warm, fuzzy feeling that someone out there is listening. And, a lot of people do have time and they want to help mentor people, or they want to help, or they have vacancies that they need to fill that may not be advertised or may not be as visible. And they'll be happy to give them the benefit of their insight, and maybe get people promoted into kind of the formal processes that will give people opportunities. So it was a valuable lesson.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's something that's come up in the podcast in previous conversations as well, the importance of networking or relationship management more widely, and mentorship. And again, that's something, if I went back, especially when I was starting my career, I wasn't really aware of, let alone put any importance on it. But if you look at, certainly as careers develop and as you make positive steps in your career, it's almost always down to the people around you as much as it is down to yourself, So the sooner you get kind of, focusing on that kind of stuff, I think the easier it'll be.
That's so insightful, Brendan, and I would fully agree. And actually, I can pinpoint nearly all of my career steps, following EY, to having known people who knew me, who knew my work, who opened doors, and I mean, that was, it's an incredibly powerful thing. It's also very interesting, Brendan, because some people, as I said, I'm quite chatty. I love meeting people. I love, finding out about people, and I'm comfortable doing that. I think it's a lot harder for maybe more introverted folks, and they may kind of struggle with that a little bit. And that's why I kind of say maybe, you know, even if you are kind of introverted and you might be a bit tongue-tied, or you mightn't feel as confident reaching out, an email is great. Connect with somebody on Twitter. You know, there's so many kind of opportunities now to kind of maybe build a network without necessarily, I think there's an old school view of networking as kind of standing around in a room with kind of, you know, having to kind of make kind of conversation. You know, you don't have to do that. There's so many outlets now to build your network, and it's really something folks should embrace in the way that they feel most comfortable with.
Big time, big time. And you mentioned, and we'll come back to EY in a second, but you mentioned the importance at the beginning of mentorship as well, Bronwyn, and having mentors throughout your career. Do you want to speak a little bit about, you know, maybe how that has worked for you as you've gone along the way?
I would, and it's interesting because, as I said, I've been very lucky in that I kind of had informal mentors who have been kind of mentors throughout my life, kind of without me having to kind of ask for a formal mentor relationship, if that makes sense. And actually, I will go back and I would say probably one of the most enduring mentors was my old lecturer from classical studies in UCD. And many people who went to UCD will know this gentleman. His name is Vic Connerty, and he was the Vice Dean of Arts for very many years over the 80s and 90s. So people like Ryan Tubridy would know Vic well. They all came up through Greek and Roman, Teresa Lowe, lots of kind of names around Ireland will have fond memories of Vic. And Vic was an amazing mentor for me throughout my career, throughout my UCD career. But also, I mean, he's the one person, every time I go home, I make sure I catch up with Vic, and we go to the Shelburne and we have a sherry and a catch up, because he still mentors me and he still gives me amazing advice. And, you know, I've been, you know, as I said, like he from very early days, I remember I started at UCD, and my very first Greek and Roman tutorial was timetabled at a time that clashed with one of my other lectures. So I had to go up, and I was 17. I wasn't very, very kind of worldly, and I was kind of quite nervous. I had to go up to the Greek and Roman department to explain that I needed to get this rescheduled. And of course I thought, oh God, I've made a mistake, and I probably didn't tell them, and, you know, it was probably on me. And Vic was standing there by the board, and I kind of was like, excuse me. And I said, I have a little problem. So he brought me into his office, and he looked, and he said, you told us that you couldn't do this lecture time, and that's our fault. So I was like, oh, phew. And then he said, well, I'm going to put you in my tutorial. And that was amazing. And that's from then on, you know, he was an amazing support to me, and he helped me when I was having some studies difficulties, and he helped supervise my master's thesis in classics. And, you know, he's remained in my life. So thank you, Vic, for your mentorship all the years, if he ever hears this. And that just really, again, Brendan, like, it shows you mentors can come in all shapes and sizes and at many different times of your life. I mean, I certainly never would have thought back then that I'd be still kind of all these years later getting such good advice and counsel from him, but I am. And I also have a few folks in my career, CISOs, who kind of took me under their wing, saw talent, helped me develop, to help me find confidence. I think many of us, and it's often a very female trait, but I think it's not just gender, but you know, we can feel that we're not ready for a role, or we're not, you know, we can't tick all the requirements on a box. So what's the point in even having the conversation? We've got to kind of earn that skill set first before we can kind of put our hat in the ring. And actually, again, I've been so lucky. I've had people in my career who have seen that I can grow into roles, and seen that I have probably maybe more talent than I give myself credit for sometimes. And just took a chance and gave me the space to learn. So I think, you know, mentors can kind of happen along that give you that guidance. I think now, you know, there's also routes to finding mentors where you feel a common set of values, or you see people that you admire, and the power of the internet and social media to reach out proactively and start building those relationships is incredible. So, you know, embrace it.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Bronwyn. And just going back to EY then, just as we go through your career, I remember you in EY, and you were in a place that we used to call the lab, which is where all the really smart people were, and no one understood what they were doing in there. And just in diversity, and lots of women in there as well. And, you know, I did get to open the door and come in every now and again, you know, but can you tell us what was going on in there? What were you doing?
Couldn't possibly tell you, Brendan. Top secret. No. Well, we were doing all of the kind of fairly confidential security assessments, and some of those might be like kind of, you know, ethical hacking, so penetration testing as they call it in the industry, although that term is changing, where you're basically paid to by system owners to kind of do your worst, take the mindset of a hacker and see how you can probe the system and break in and see what you could do with access that you might be able to get. You might want to do that in a physical building or an office space. So I had a number of those type of physical tests where, I have to say, you go in with a cup of coffee or a load of coffee. Oh, I need someone to open the door for me. And you kind of, help utilize people's natural inclination to be helpful to see how far you can take it. And they were always fascinating. They were so insightful and really, really, really exciting. And again, I think if you think about cybersecurity, folks will have seen films like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or Hackers or all of these things. And those types of activities were probably more what we were doing in the lab, as well as also forensic acquisitions. And they might have been very sensitive. So, anything from, a suspected fraud where we've needed to kind of, get images of machines to see what activities were happening at particular timestamps and try and build up a story of what a user has been doing. And again, in a way that has to be robust enough to be presentable in a court of law. So you've got a very high bar of evidentiary proof and a chain of custody to maintain so that you can kind of bring that into legal proceedings if needed. So again, it was very high stakes stuff, very interesting stuff. Again, a great learning ground and a totally different application of security to what I had previously seen, it was more about building security into things. This was more about actually trying to hack in and trying to disrupt service and trying to break security so that you can make it better.
And you clearly enjoyed your role in EY. What took you on to the next step? And I know you went to London following EY, but can you talk a little bit about the move and what you moved into as well?
I can, and indeed it's an interesting story, Brendan, because it reinforces that network point. I had done a bit of work with Barclays Bank around their online digital fraud posture. And it was really interesting for me because, again, it got me a bit closer to online banking and digital banking, and my memories of that digital bank that I was coding back in the day kind of was coming back to me, and I really enjoyed that work. And a little while later, there's an annual event here in the UK called the White Hat Ball, which is a charity ball in aid of Childline and the NSPCC, run by the security community to raise funds. And EY had sponsored a table in the UK, and they said, send a few folks over from Ireland. So I came over and again met another great mentor of my career, a chap named Stephen Bonner, who's a very well-known and well-respected figurehead in the UK security industry, is now working with the Information Commissioner. I connected with Stephen and we started chatting. And then a few months later, I was back in Dublin, probably around May time. And he said, I'm building a team here in the UK. I'm building a new information risk management function at Barclays. It's brand new. It's, we haven't done this before. And, do you fancy coming over? So, it wasn't on my kind of plan, but, the kind of timing just felt serendipitous. And I said, righto, here I go. And moved over. And I was very lucky as well because the EY network was very, very good to me. You probably remember John McKelvey, you might. I mean, he was around at the same time you do. John's a great guy. And he had moved over to London just before me. So he said, I've got a room in my house. Come and land here for the first few months. And so our EY in London town network got ourselves fostered. And the rest is history, Brendan. I'm still here all these years later. That was back in 2007. And here I am, very firmly ensconced on the other side of the pond. But I get back home as often as I can.
Brilliant stuff. And Bronwyn, do you have a career highlight that you could share for listeners?
I have so many, Brendan. I have so many. Which I feel immensely fortunate about. I think probably my last role was a particular highlight before I joined Mambu. I spent a year and a half working with the open banking implementation entity here in the UK. Now that's a not-for-profit, it's kind of semi-regulatory organisation, and it was put in place by the UK government to help the adoption of open banking as a concept and help build the infrastructure that supports open banking. Now, open banking as a concept, I think, is not very well understood. So if you'll do me the indulgence of explaining it for a minute or two, it's essentially a new way of allowing customers access to their banking data that they've built up over the years. So you and I probably have a bank account with maybe number of kind of traditional banks, and all of that banking data that we have amassed in terms of our transactions, all of that is of value to the bank, but it's also of value to us, and it's our data. And what open banking does is it gives an option for us to now share that data with new types of innovative products and services, so that we can get better services, get a better deal, and get kind of a more fair banking experience. So if you look at a lot of new technology around kind of currency translations, or your spending analysis type apps, all of those are typically using open banking, and essentially it means that the kind of the product or service has direct access with your permission to your relevant banking data, and it will use that data to give you, as I said, a better deal or a better product or service. One of the probably big success stories from last year was Captain Tom's fundraiser here in the UK, which I think probably hit a lot of headlines around the world. I mean, God bless him, 30 million raised from walking around his garden, which was phenomenal during COVID. Every single penny from that went through open banking payments channels, and what that meant was there were no credit card fees, there were no intermediary fees. All of that money went directly to the charity. And that's really fantastic, because we're seeing now a disintermediation. So some of the big players that would have kind of creamed off a little bit on top, for their operational expenses, that's not required anymore. So it's a real game changer. And being part of that, helping that adoption, helping that stay secure, that was a real dream job, and I absolutely loved it.
That's brilliant. And we spoke a little bit offline, didn't we, Bronwyn, as well, about the importance of finding the right fit for your own values. In terms of who you work for, and you kind of landed there, didn't you? And also with Mambu as well, in terms of the direction and the values of the companies, yeah.
Exactly, Brendan. I mean, it's interesting because I think, banking gets a bad rap for lots of reasons. I think, we haven't, as an industry, financial services hasn't always had the best interests of customers or society at heart. And for me now to be part of organisations that are changing that have strong ethical values, that are really trying to change the whole dynamic of financial services, is just, it's a real game changer. It gets me out of bed in the morning with a spring in my step, and it's a lovely feeling to know that you're really kind of changing the industry for the better.
That's fantastic. And Bronwyn, if you could meet yourself back when you were doing your philosophy studies for a coffee, what advice would you give yourself?
That's
knowing
such
what you
a
know
great
now.
question, Brendan. It's such a great question. I think I would say spend less time worrying about things and more about just being brave and believing in yourself, and being, just put the anxiety out of your head and the imposter syndrome out of your head, and just be you, be as engaged as you can. When I think about the hamster wheels of our brain, Brendan, and some of the brain cycles that we waste on kind of, am I good enough, or have I done this right, or was this right, or, and actually just try and silence that voice, try and silence that inner critic, and try and just embrace kind of what you're doing, and be present in it, and give yourself as fully to you can, and be curious and open, and, as you say, don't be afraid to ask the questions. That would be one thing. And I think the other thing I would say is, it's okay not to know what you want to do, or it's okay not to know what you want to be when you grow up, or what you want to, what you want to kind of do in the long term. We don't necessarily have to have a path mapped out for us. And indeed, the world is changing around us so quickly that if you did map that path out, it'll be looking very windy and very different anyway down the line. So it's okay not to know. Just take each new opportunity and seek out those opportunities, seek out those relationships at the time, and embrace them.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and thanks for taking the time to come on this podcast and share your experience and your advice. I mean, I said again offline earlier, my memory of you, and we worked very short time together for EY, but I remember you used to come out at the lab every evening, and you would, be bubbly and positive, even no matter how late it was in the evening, and you would go around and say goodbye to everybody, and that made a huge impression on me. That kind of quality that you have, that kind of inspiring quality, and you've won an award for it now, which is which is great. But I have two young kids, two young girls myself, and I think it's brilliant that you're doing this, and I'll be making them watch it as well, because it is inspiring to listen to you. So thank you very, very much.
You're so welcome. Thanks a million for the opportunity, and it's so lovely to see you again.
Cheers, Bronwyn. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye, everybody.
Brendan, you're very good.